All right, everybody. My second guest here this week on the Phillip Jordan Show is Jay Stevens. You can check him out on Locked On Buckeyes every single day, and also the Jay Stevens podcast. Of course, Jay is here. You already heard Palmer Thomas. He broke down the Georgia side of the Peach Bowl between Georgia and Ohio State. Now we're getting the Ohio State perspective with Jay Stevens and Jay. We've been, I mean, you talked off air. We've talked a lot this season on my podcast, also on yours. But I appreciate you jumping on to preview and break down the Ohio State side of this game.
Phillip, I'm glad to be here with you. Thanks for having me back on the show. Excited for this game on New Year's Eve between these two schools. And honestly, I'm just excited for the college football playoff as a whole, as I do think TCU, who's many are saying is the fourth best team in this playoff. I think TCU is a team that has a possibility to shock the Wolverines in the first game, first game in the playoff.
Oh, wow! Big call on that one. So with the seeding, were you okay with the way that they did the seeding? There was some discussion out there. Some people believe that Ohio State should have went to 3 and TCU should have dropped to 4, just because some people believe if you lose, you should drop. Where were you on that? On where Ohio State did land in the playoff at number 4?
I'm fine with where they fell, with where they were at number 4 in the playoff. I think there could be an argument to be made about Ohio State potentially being the third best team in the country, even though they lost. But I say it all the time: win, you lose matters. And I think that if that loss was earlier in the year, even if it was to the Wolverines, the same outcome, same game, I think the Buckeyes could have been number 3. But when they lost, and really with how TCU played in the Big 12 championship game, going into overtime and still having a shot to win, I'm okay. I am perfectly fine with the Horned Frogs being 3 and the Buckeyes being 4.
So obviously, this was the discussion on the Sunday when they announced it. Do you think they were just trying to avoid Michigan and Ohio State again?
Somewhat yes, because you don't want a dud in your opening playoff game. But also, I think they're trying to get really big matchups in the semifinal round and the national championship game. My gut says Michigan beats TCU. And whoever wins the game between Ohio State and Georgia, that national championship game is going to have a lot of buzz around it. A lot of eyeballs will be around it. If you get Ohio State, Michigan in the national championship, that's a ratings bonanza, no matter what the outcome is. So I don't know if they're trying to avoid it. I think they just tried to properly do things at the end of the season that seemed right. I think the BCS would have had the same teams just shuffle the order around. I don't know if they were trying to avoid that matchup overall. Because if they were, yes, it could be a bad outcome. But the ratings and the views for that would be stupid. I mean, like stupid in a good way. So I don't know, because that's a thought. But once again, the playoff wants ratings, the CFP wants ratings, and that's what Ohio State, Michigan bring every time they're on the TV.
Now, look, we could very well get it in the championship game, because I tell you, looking at this game, I know Georgia obviously the favorite. This is the best game of the two. Yeah. I mean, just when you look at the talent on the field, because I came into the season looking at this as these were 2 of the 3 best teams. I had Alabama there. Alabama was my favorite coming into the season because what they had coming back. Then I was like, Ohio State's your number 2. I thought Alabama and Ohio State would be the national championship game. I was like, look, Georgia lost some guys off last year's team, but Kirby Smart has Tuscaloosa 2.0 going over in Athens. I mean, they're just bringing more and more talent. They lose talent, they have talent, replace it. So with these 2 teams, if you would have told me going to the year that Georgia and Ohio State would play in the postseason, okay, that's a national championship game. But now we got these 2 in the semifinal. And when you look at it, when you look at Georgia as a number 1 seed, they got the toughest draw when you look at versus what Michigan got as a number 2 seed.
Oh, I agree. I 100% agree that they got the tougher draw. But no matter who it would have been, Ohio State or Michigan, you would easily say that team got the tougher draw, whoever is facing Ohio State. Mm-hmm. Now, you would think you'd want to cater to the number 1 team and have the number 1 team play the weaker of the 4 teams in the playoff. But once again, when the Buckeyes lost matters. And I think that was in the minds of the committee, which is a big reason why Ohio State is 4. Georgia fans probably aren't happy. Georgia players are probably like, we got screwed. Who cares? Play the game. Get on the field. 4 quarters, 60 minutes. Go out there and get it done. And so, yeah, they did get the tougher of the draw, but Isn't that what you want? Like, you want the best team in the country to beat one of the better teams in the country to win the national championship. Like, this is what you want. And so, yeah, they got the tougher draw, but that's how things went right now. And I hope Georgia is ready for Ohio State, because I think Ohio State is getting ready for the Bulldogs.
And look, Georgia has a huge advantage going into this game because where this game is being played at. This game is being played in their backyard in Atlanta, in the Peach Bowl. And every time Georgia plays in the SEC championship game, it's a Georgia home game. I mean, it is a tough environment. When they played LSU, that was probably 80% Georgia. So I ask you this just as we jump into this matchup. How well do you think Ohio State fans are going to travel to Atlanta in this game to kind of look? I don't expect it to be even 50-50 fans. I feel Georgia's going to have the advantage there. But how do you feel like the Ohio State fans are going to travel to Atlanta and support their team?
Oh, man, I don't think it'll be 50-50. But I do think there'll be a lot of Ohio State fans there. Ohio State quickly sold their allotment of tickets within a few days after the tickets for the Peach Bowl went on sale. And even I do believe Gary Stokin, the CEO of the Peach Bowl, was talking about how he was amazed at how quickly the Buckeyes sold those tickets. Here's a little fun fact for you, Phillip, for all your listeners and for you to enjoy. Ohio State has never played in the Peach Bowl, ever. None, not at all. But it goes even further. Ohio State's never played in Atlanta. They played more games in Arizona or Dallas, or Rose Bowl, of course, because of the ties to the Big Ten. They have played 0 games in Atlanta. It's about an 8-hour drive if you want to drive from Columbus to Atlanta. Not really hard at all. It might actually be a shorter drive than that. But I think it'll be. I think there'll be a lot more Ohio State fans there than people expect because of the proximity to Columbus, how Atlanta is a hotbed for Ohio State alums. And I just really think that it's going to be not as lopsided of a crowd as you think. Now, even though the Buckeyes sold their allotment of tickets quickly and shortly after they went on sale, sites like SeatGeek and StubHub and those like that, I don't know if Buckeye fans are only going to sell those tickets to Buckeye fans to make money. Like, I don't know. And so you might get Georgia fans on those markets saying, we're going to take this, we're going to take that, going to take this, going to take that. That might be how Georgia fans get there. But I do think New Year's Eve, and as many people are going to have either that Friday off or that Monday off or both, my gut says there's going to be a lot more Ohio State fans down in Atlanta, Georgia for this game than people think.
Yeah, I think they'll travel more, which, of course, I'll say this, and any LSU fans listening to this may be upset with me. LSU probably knew they weren't going to win against Georgia, so not as many of them went, and probably that's why it was also a big Georgia contingency there in Atlanta for that one too as well. So let's look at this game. I want to start off strength for strength, and that is the Ohio State offense versus the Georgia defense. And, Jay, I'm going to give you kind of the open floor here. What's the big matchup there? Where do you see it? Where does Ohio State need to go? How do they need to be successful against this Georgia defense, which is one of the best in the country?
So how do they need to be successful? I think, and I said this for a long time, the interior of the offensive line needs to be able to slow down any penetration, consistently slow down the penetration that the Georgia front can get. Now, everyone knows, or everyone's heard about Jalen Carter and how he's probably going to be a top 5 pick this upcoming NFL draft. Great. But Georgia has dudes and dogs all over the defense. And I looked at some numbers. Georgia's only allowed 17 touchdowns in 13 games this year. They're only giving up 76.9 rushing yards per game, which is number 1 in the country. They're giving up 2.93 yards per carry, number 3 in the country. Only allowed 5 rushing touchdowns. For as good of a quarterback as Stroud is, as great as his arm is, Stroud has his own limitations, and he's not the perfect quarterback. And you could say, Jay, the penetration might come in the passing game. Yes, that's one thing. But the best way to get Stroud to have bigger windows to throw the ball is to run the ball. Now, I don't know, to be honest with you, Phillip, I don't know if the interior of Ohio State's offensive line is ready for what Georgia is going to throw at them. I have no idea, because we saw what happened against Michigan. They were able to move the ball a little bit on the ground, better than what I expected. But I don't know. Georgia's defensive front's different. It's a step above the Michigan defensive front. So I think the first off, the Buckeyes have to slow down penetration from the Georgia Bulldogs defensive front to allow Stroud to get comfortable. And the great way to do that, also couple that with find a way to establish the run. Now, people out there, it was a week ago, it came out, Trevion Henderson is not playing in the playoff. He's having surgery to repair torn ligaments in his foot. I don't think that's as big of an issue for the Buckeyes as people think. I think with Mayan Williams being back healthy and either Chip Trainum or Dallin Hayden or even Xavier Johnson, who's played a little running back, a little receiver this year, I think those guys can assist Stroud in throwing the ball by establishing the run against Georgia. It's a really tall task, really, really hard. But I firmly think if the Buckeyes want to be able to move the ball and score the 40 points that I do believe they'll need to win this game, you have to slow down things in the middle of the trenches. That's going to open things out on the outside for guys like Marvin Harrison Jr. in one-on-one situations, Emeka Ibuka, maybe even cased over in seam routes at the tight end position. I think that's going to open things up for them. But I do believe the Buckeyes, if they want to win this game, yes, it's cliche. Games are won and lost in the trenches. Well, it's not just a cliche. It's reality. And the Buckeyes know to open things up for Stroud, you got to slow down the penetration in the middle from Georgia's defense. If you want to open things up for the receivers, control the middle of the offensive, control the middle of the line. If you want to help Stroud out, establish the run. It's going to be difficult because I do believe the Buckeyes have more inside the tackle type of runners than outside the tackle type of runners during this game, which is going to be interesting because I wonder, are they going to try to run right into the heart of this defense? You can't do it consistently, but also if you run outside, who's your go-to guy? Is it Dallin Hayden, a freshman? It could work. Is it Xavier Johnson in some trick style plays? It could work, but how much do you want to run Xavier Johnson in the backfield? These are the things that we like, Phil, the back and forth, the nitty-gritty. But I do think the Buckeyes have some weapons up their sleeve. I just don't know if they want to use them properly.
When I look at this matchup, and previously before I had you on, I had Palmer Thomas, who covers Georgia for On 3 Dogs HQ, and I told him, and this is just my feeling on this game, I believe Jalen Carter is the most important player in this game because what he is able to do up front, because there's a good chunk of the season he missed for Georgia. I mean, it just did. But the Tennessee game is when I look at, because now I will say this, and the Vol Nation can jump all over me on Twitter, P. Jordan SEC, just bring it. Ohio State's receivers, I think, are better than Tennessee's. Not by much, but I just think they're better. These are guys who are going to be drafted in the first round NFL draft. Tennessee may have guys going to be drafted, but I think Ohio State's better. But what they did in that game to Hendon Hooker was the pressure up the middle. It wasn't on the outside, the pass rushers. It was Jalen Carter and that defense front. How do you see Ohio State handling that in the middle of their offensive line? Because if Jalen Carter is able to get some penetration at the middle in the pass game, because just from what I've seen from C.J. Stroud, he doesn't seem comfortable throwing outside the pocket. He's really great in the pocket. That's just me watching. You watch a whole lot more Ohio State than I have, so if I'm wrong, you can tell me. But I feel like that, for me, that's the biggest key is Jalen Carter has a big game and how Ohio State blocks him.
No, you're exactly right with Stroud, your analysis of him. Outside the pocket, that's not his forte. And ultimately, I do think Stroud, he's like a lot of quarterbacks, where a lot of quarterbacks don't like pressure in their face. Okay, people don't like pressure in their face. If you've been at work, or if you've been out playing a game, or if you've been out somewhere and somebody comes right in your face and points their finger and starts doing all this, you wouldn't like it either. Now, some of you on YouTube are like, I don't like this guy pointing. Well, imagine being a quarterback in college where you're getting pressure up the middle consistently. It's not fun. It's not fun at all. And so I do think, though, if that penetration up the middle happens and the Buckeyes aren't able to keep a back in the backfield to help protect the middle rush, it's going to be a long game, man. It's going to be a really, really, really long game. I do think one way that they can help that is if Stroud runs the ball a little. I'm not saying he needs to be like a Justin Fields for the Chicago Bears style runner. I am not saying that. But if you feel more comfortable in the pocket moving around, that's going to really make the defenders up front second guess their first initial move or even their counter because you're unpredictable with your movements on the football field. Ultimately, I think that Stroud is being coached to play the football. And now I'm not saying not to run. I think there was a portion of time that Stroud was being coached not to run the ball. I firmly believe that. Some say, why would a coach do that? Well, the way Stroud plays football, he does not play like someone who runs around, is comfortable moving in the pocket like he does it in practice. He does not move like that. So, pressure at the middle is going to be a problem. It's going to be a huge problem. I know how the Buckeyes can stop it. I don't know if they can.
And, finally, before we jump with the Ohio State defense versus the Georgia offense, now, everybody wants to talk about what Ohio State did their last game. Let's talk about what Georgia did their last game. And I brought this up before with other people. LSU threw for 500 yards on this Georgia defense. And it's not like the game was over, second half, LSU was putting up a lot of passing yards. Jaden Daniels in the first half, he was having success. Malik Neighbors and Kayshon Boutte were getting behind the Georgia defense. And then it continued in the second half when Garrett Nussmeier took over quarterback. So you look at that from the Ohio State standpoint, we brought the receivers, Marvin Harrison Jr. leading the way. What C.J. Stroud can do at quarterback, do you see that as an opportunity for the Ohio State offense that has success?
Yeah, I do. I think that if there's a way for the Ohio State offense to have success, I keep talking about the interior, but this offense flows when the guys on the outside are getting loose. I firmly believe that. I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is it can have one of those games where you remember what he did on New Year's Eve, the final day in 2022, because he took it personally when he did not win the Bolitnikoff Award for the best wide receiver in the country. I get it. I understand it. I know how it is. Whatever I think doesn't matter because it's all about Marvin Harrison Jr. And I think he watched that LSU game against Georgia, and I think he's seen some of the ways that he can attack this Georgia defensive secondary. And I do think that he's going to come out and be ready to play in this game.
That's going to be an interesting part of it because, like I said, everybody wants to mention what Ohio State did against Michigan last. We need to do the same thing with Georgia. I know they won, but they had some issues against the passing game of LSU. So now we'll flip over the Ohio State defense versus Georgia offense. And I've said this, and look, everybody knows this that knows me, but the Twitter handle speaks for itself. I watch more SEC than I have. I've seen a lot more Georgia than I have Ohio State. So I will admit that up front for, your audience, Jay, that may be coming in listening to this. Just let everybody know that. Just know where I am in the South. But I look at the Georgia offense as one of the most underrated offenses in college football. They're seventh in the country. They're just not – they're different. They're very creative with what they do with Stetson Bennett. They have a three-headed monster running back. They have two monsters at tight end, and Brock Bowers and Darnell Washington as well. But with Ohio State, I will say this about Georgia this year. There's been some games where they've got sloppy with the ball and some turnovers. And Ohio State causes 1.4 turnovers per game. That's been when they played really well this year. They're causing turnovers with that defense. I'll flip that over, though. Be fair. Ohio State's given up a lot of big plays this year. So for you, when you look at that matchup, the Ohio State defense versus Georgia offense, what sticks out to you and what's going to be key for the Buckeyes?
Well, you mentioned the big plays, and most of the big plays that Ohio State has given up, those drives have resulted in either 3 points or none. They still have found ways to stop the defense when they've given up big plays. It was weird. It was weird in the Michigan game because all of a sudden those big plays turned to touchdowns, and that's when you kind of get exposed. Biggest stage of the season, all of a sudden you can't do things consistently, so on and so forth. So I do think that Ohio State, when it comes to Ohio State's defense, they just got to be fundamentally sound. It's hard. It's going to be hard. It'll be very, very hard because they have not been fundamentally sound a lot this season. But they have to be fundamentally sound. In the secondary, which has been the biggest liability, I don't think it's going to be as difficult as it was maybe against Maryland, where Maryland had different weapons. Georgia's good. Stetson Bennett is a good quarterback. I think this defense is going to they have the – I keep saying I think they can. I know they can. I don't know if they will. Buckeyes defense has the ability to throw some wrinkles at Georgia. This coaching staff has been very, very stubborn, and I didn't know if I was going to go here. This coaching staff has been very, very stubborn and not getting out of their own way and adjusting quickly to what's happening on the field. And that's been a problem for the Buckeyes, even though they have an 11-1 record. they could easily be undefeated and beat Michigan if they would have just made adjustments on the fly and adjustments that everybody in the country saw, but they refused to. And in this game, Phillip, I don't know if the coaches are going to make the proper adjustments on the fly, or even they're probably preparing their team to go up against Georgia, because I don't know if this coaching staff is able to get out of their own way. And to me, that's a really bad sign. And it's not a good look for Ryan Day, Jim Knowles coaching the defense and things like that, because you have to get out of your own way to coach the team properly so the team can win the games. The team could easily have 2 or 3 losses this year if they didn't have the amount of talent they have stockpiled there in Columbus. If it wasn't for that talent, looking at more losses, Ohio State's year this year could easily be like Clemson's a year ago. But the coaches, man, the coaches have been lucky this team is so talented. Because if not, they would not be in the playoff. And ultimately, Phillip, you and I, if I was on this podcast talking about Ohio State, it would be a different conversation. Like, well, what's going on with Ryan Day? Is he the guy in Columbus? Things like that. I think Ryan Day can change the narrative about him quickly by doing some things properly in preparation for the big game against Georgia. And also, in his own mind, making sure to properly adjust on the fly when the team needs to make some adjustments in the game.
So, to kind of wrap up, with Ohio State defense, Georgia offense, of course, which all my stats have been, but he's like a point guard to me. He just distributes the ball. He gets the ball out. He gets the playmakers. Their biggest playmakers, obviously, their tight end, Brock Bowers. When you look at him, what do you think Ohio State does to kind of neutralize him? Because if Brock Bowers is dominating you in the middle, that opens up the receivers. And the thing is with him, they will run jet sweeps with him, and he's as fast as a wide receiver. So he's not – look, he is a wide receiver in tight end's body. Let's just call it what it is, and he'd be a first-round draft pick if he could come out. Just think he's got one more year of college he has to play. But anyways, Ohio State's defense, how do you think they do that against Brock Bowers?
Phillip, for a while, I was saying that Sonny Styles, a true freshman safety, linebacker, hybrid type of player, is the kind of guy that you want to match up with these really special tight ends that people have. I don't know if the Buckeyes coaches will put a true freshman in there that hasn't really played that much defense this year to guard a guy like Brock Bowers because of how talented he is. Sonny Styles, 6'4", 220, has a size, has a speed, doesn't have the experience. I think he has some physicality. Don't know if he has all the physicality because we just haven't seen him play enough football this year to know exactly what's there. I do know that they love him and what he brings to the table, but he's the kind of guy you kind of want, a bigger body type of defender to go up against Brock Bowers. If you're going to go in one-on-one coverage, that's the kind of guy you want. You kind of got to do a variation of things. You can't give Brock Bowers the same look over and over, or Stetson Bennett the same look over and over, or they're going to cook you. Like they're just going to cook you for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and even have a late night snack as well. So I think you got to try to find some different ways, mix up zone, disguise things. You'll use Lathan Ransom pretty heavily in guarding if you want to do Brock Bowers one-on-one, kind of have Lathan Ransom kind of mirror Brock Bowers. Even if you're running zone, similar to basketball, how some coaches will run a box and one in high school or a diamond and one in high school, and you have that fifth defender mirroring and shadowing the other team's best player. Similar to this, you kind of want to have run your 10 guys, and then whoever is on Brock Bowers, he follows him all over the field. Similar to how some quarterbacks have some defenses have a QB spy. You kind of want that on Brock Bowers because you don't want to allow him to get too much separation or get loose. Because as you said, if he's getting you over the middle or even with those jet sweeps, it's going to be a long game for you. Once again, Phillip, I said it once, I'll say it again. My belief in this Ohio State coaching staff keeps getting less and less because they have refused to make the proper adjustments in games for the Buckeyes to not leave the game wondering what happened in that matchup. And with Brock Bowers, I don't know if they're going to do what's needed to properly defend him in the biggest game of the year.
So finally, we'll close it off with this question. If Ohio State wins, how do they do it?
Controlling Brock Bowers and really neutralizing him. I think if you slow him down, Georgia does not score over 30 points against Ohio State. I firmly think that. I think it's the defensive game that whoever has a better defense in this matchup does win the game. And so as much as it's going to be on Stroud's shoulders or the running game shoulders, if this defense is able to slow down Brock Bowers and slow down the best player on the other team and really slow down any type of firepower Georgia's offense has, I think the Buckeyes on defense can really do some. Excuse me. When the Buckeyes are on offense, they can have a little bit more freedom and not be as uptight because the game is not getting out of hand early in the first half. But really, you got to slow down Brock Bowers. But ultimately, Stroud has to play the game of his life. Like, C.J. Stroud has to be the quarterback who went to New York 2 years in a row, did not win the Heisman Trophy, used that as motivation, and play the game of his life. As much as it's about the defense of Ohio State, that's a big factor because defenses truly win championships. But Stroud has to be the best quarterback in this upcoming draft class. He has to be. If not, the Buckeyes don't win. The Buckeyes lose by 10-plus points. And the narrative about Stroud as an Ohio State quarterback is not a good one. The narrative about Ryan Day gets worse. And Georgia goes on to play probably Michigan in the national championship.
It's going to be interesting. We got plenty of big name players. We've mentioned them here. We're going into this. I mean, like, this is the marquee matchup of the two games. No disrespect to Michigan and TCU, but this is the marquee matchup, Ohio State, Michigan. So it's going to be Ohio State and Georgia. I did not try to spoil anybody out there saying it just, all these teams, you kind of step up. Ohio State and Georgia are the best game. But and Jay, this has been a fun conversation as always. I always enjoy having you on the show, talk Ohio State, all things football, sports. We got to start recording our pregame conversations. What we have, everybody just needs to know those are great conversations as well. But if the listeners and viewers want to check out online, where can I find you? Where can they find out Locked On Buckeyes?
You guys can find me on Twitter at jstevens07. Actually, before I go any further, Phil, thanks for having me back on the podcast. I really appreciate it. Always love talking ball and talking football with you, media stuff, off air. It's always a fun, extended conversation. You can listen to or watch Locked On Buckeyes on YouTube every day or on the Odyssey app, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your fine podcast. Also, check out the Jay Stevens podcast once a week. And we are ramping up football, NFL football. Got some injuries. Lamar still hurt. Jalen Hurts is hurt. College football, going to be talking more Ohio State, Michigan, TCU, Georgia, bowl games, all of that stuff as well. But, Phillip, I say it all the time. Thanks for having me on the podcast, man. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's always fun having you on, Jay. Once again, I appreciate the time, and I look forward to talking again sometime down the road.
Yes, sir. Can't wait.
Hold up. Video's not over with yet. Not quite yet. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe on YouTube, Phillip Jordan Show YouTube channel. Also, hit the bell for all the notifications. And if you leave a comment on the video, including this one or many other ones here on the channel, I'll read it on a future edition of the show. You can also check out the show over on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your audio content. Just hit the subscribe button over there or follow whichever one they're asking us to do now. And also rate the show. I would appreciate 5 stars. 4 stars, you were just a straight up hater. And look, if you don't like the show, I guess you can give it a 1 star as well. But leave a review. I read those on the show as well. Really would appreciate you guys doing that. Follow me on social media at pjordansec. Hey, and also you can email me, sports.phillipjordan@gmail.com. Now you guys can go find another video to watch. Hopefully one here on the channel, or wherever you're going next. But please do that. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notifications, leave a comment, and check out the audio podcast.